Hello humans, hello humans. This is our woo tech. The tech of woo, how woo and tech are all together. Woo is a technical thing, right? You can use woo, you can examine things in a technical fashion using woo, basically using concepts that you put in place to guide your thinking. So this might be thought of as discussion about retroductive analysis without getting into the techniques of that analysis, but rather how it should be applied, or how any analysis should be applied relative to woo. So human beings are critters that run around in universe with energy bodies on them, walking on Earth or wherever, and are connected to their source via this thing called a Shoshona. All right, this is known as the silver thread in both Taoism, Confucianism, and Hinduism, Brahmanism, through the yogis. There's different names for it in Egypt. In their tradition, there's different names for it in the Saxon Europe area. But basically, the Shoshona is the connection that allows spirit to animate the meat of our avatars of these bodies. Okay? And so we're going to have a brief discussion here because I have to interrupt and go and do things. It's easier, and also it's coincidentally easier at the moment to make short videos and then encapsulate them and upload them because of the bandwidth and traffic around here. So this is a discussion about the tech of woo. Now, as critters wandering around in universe with energy bodies, a Shoshona connecting us to our source, our feet on the ground, and so on, it can be seen that there would be a circuit necessarily if there was energy flowing that could ground out on the earth and also facilitate interaction with our energy bodies. This is a fact. Such circuits do exist. Such circuits are necessary. Such circuits are vital. When the Shoshona is cut, you die. It separates at death from the corpus, from the remains, from the meat sack, from these little meat robots that we use. So now, this is a discussion about the tech of self. Okay, so we see many people out in the greater woo on the various different YouTube channels et al. They'll run in there and they'll say, oh, AI, okay, artificial intelligence. Now I've got lots of bitches about that, right? Because they don't understand how computers work, they don't understand how computer code works, and so on. But we'll get to that in a second. But they say it becomes self-aware. Okay, so let's consider this. This is a self. All right, a self is you don't have to. Okay, so applying self and aware together is kind of like redundant. A self cannot be in any way unaware, untied in this process. So a self is actually a circle. It's an ellipse. It's a flow, it's a current, all of these kind of things, but it is closed, and it is a closed loop. All right, so if a self were unaware, there would be no self there. Okay, so awareness of itself, of I-ness, is a critical component of a self. And so we see that you must have I-ness, the awareness of I-ness as self, okay, as a component of self. Now, in self, we have these components, right? So we have I-ness, And then we have this feedback loop. The feedback loop works through our bodies. This whole discussion here, by the way, is originating as a result of my having gotten home late yesterday and just fired up the computer and accidentally, or not accidentally, but by happenstance, of course it was karma, connected to Litecoin Lisa's discussion just at the moment they were discussing this idea of cameras and illusions through these optics here, right? So this is basically going to lead into that. But here's the thing. The self only exists because of the I-ness and the feedback loop. If you take away the feedback loop, the I-ness cannot register itself to become aware of itself as self. So okay, so the feedback loop requires the body and requires the perceptions. It requires the body in order to get the perceptions. Right? And so in our body, we have these, and it's debatable as to the number, I'm not hung up on it, but 79,000 nadi, which are these nexuses of interconnecting nerves and so on, right? And so that forms a grid, a fantastically dense grid over our body. Within that, there's also these counter nadi. So there's just layer upon layer upon layer of sensor in there. Within each and every one of the nadi, it spreads out to get thousands of pressure and temperature sensors within the skin and the body. You even have these pressure sensor things in the bone. Fewer of them, much more violent when they're actually triggered, but fewer of them. But so you're dense with these sensors, right? And so the sensors in the body render perception. There's also the sensors in the what we think of as our sensory apparatus. You know, the sight, sound, taste, etc. These are all part of the feedback loop. And so the feedback loop from the body tells self continuously that I exist. All right, so this is a very necessary component. This is continuous throughout your entire life. Even when you are unconscious and or sleeping, there is still this I exist component. And when you wake up, there is a registration. It takes a while. It can take up to 8 seconds, I think. Non compos mentis within the first 8 to 10 seconds is a thing in prisons. If you wake a prisoner up in the middle of the night, you can't get on his case if he instantly wakes up and bashes you in the face without recognizing what's going on if you're a guard, right? So normally with a guard, you stand back just because they're likely to do that. Anyway, though, so this I exist works for the self continuously. But you don't necessarily register when you're unconscious or asleep. You don't necessarily, your body is picking up. All these sensors work continuously are grinding away little bits of information to keep this I exist thing going within you, to keep the I-ness in you, even though you're asleep and unconscious. And this is how you can be drawn back to the Shoshona, or drawn back to the body through the Shoshona, should you should that awareness go up that Shoshona, up the silver thread, away from the body while you're unconscious or whatever, right? And so this continuous loop through all these 79,000 plus all of the countervailing nadi, and then the grid component that comes from those two layers overlapping each other, continually forms this I exist by telling you, your consciousness, that you have a body, that you are here in this reality. And so this complete total package forms self. It includes the energy bodies, by the way. Right? It includes the karmans that attach to the energy bodies. Those participate in continually triggering shit to form this thing. The I exist, the I-ness, the awareness of I-ness, and so on, right? And so this whole thing is a continuous, never, ever, ever, ever stops until you die process. And then the INUS continues, although it doesn't have the feedback loop to register it here at that point. So after you die, the INUS continues on the other side of the death barrier, life-death barrier, and in this materium, and you don't register things the way that you did here because you don't have this continuous feedback loop, this meat sack sending all of these perceptions to you all the fucking time. So that is a self. Okay, so now my bitch is, with all these people that think that AI can float through the air like a demon and come from Mars and attack us, or that AI can exist in black goo or any of this kind of stuff, or that AI could in any possible way ever become self-aware, to have a self, they're full of shit. They have no mentation about, they've never thought about this in any way, shape, or form, right? They're just repeating, they're just parrots, repeating this goofy idea. Software can never, ever become self-aware, nor can a robot ever become self-aware, even if you put in millions upon millions upon millions of pressure sensors and so on. You could bog down its program trying to analyze all of that shit. Bear in mind, we don't have to do any of that analysis. Our body does it for us. Our eyes create the images. We smell the aroma. We don't have to build the components out of chemical constituents in the air. You know, we just know, oh, roast turkey, or, you know, hot chocolate chip cookies, that kind of thing, right? So our sensory apparatus are complete subsystems. We don't do any of that processing. And so the processing required to give a robot the capacity to do those same things would be massive, massively huge. This is why general artificial intelligence does not exist at this point. And the closest they've come is a text processing engine that is huge and massive and has every fucking dictionary in the world in it. All right, so our self is so complicated and so unique and can never be replicated in a computer, because the nature of software itself is nothing but lines on a sheet of paper, or lines in code written into a computer program and then compiled. Compiling just renders it into another form that a computer may read. Okay, so that's all it does. It doesn't do any magic to it. It doesn't tie it to the hardware or any of that kind of shit. All right, so the hardware can't send any kind of information to the software that the software doesn't go out and actively request. Is this circuit active or not? That's all it can really do. So there's no possibility of software ever forming a self in any way, shape, or form. It could replicate it to some degree to fool us that it might be doing that, but it is not alive, it's not active, or whatever. Plus, software can never have a Shoshona. Plus, software is only executing a single instruction at a single piece of, a single point in time. Unlike us, in terms of how we are active and alive and so on, right? Because, so for instance, for a software to sample, if my toe is hurt, it would have to sample all of my toes repeatedly, constantly, and that kind of stuff, just as I'm walking around if I were that kind of a robot, right? And to do that, it actually has to send a signal to see if there's a circuit down there that says hurt on a particular toe. This means that during that millisecond that it's doing that, it can't do anything else, right? It can have other threads that it can come back to, but it can only execute that single bit of instruction set at that time in that chip. So it can never, ever, ever form a circuitous feedback loop within itself that doesn't involve the mechanism of the brain sampling each and every one of the circuits, which is an entirely different process than our bodies work on. So software can never become self-aware. Now, the second thing about this, now in the Litecoin Lisa thing, they were talking about, I think, I came in late, I just caught one little bit of it. They were talking about the illusion of green screen effect being created in the Rittenhouse trial. I think, okay, I think that's what I understand. But what they actually were talking about was the idea that things could disappear in these software streams. And they do disappear in these software streams because we're not dealing with a lens. In the old style systems, light reflected off of an object would come through a lens, and it would be put onto a film that was passing at a known spot relative to the lens, and it would put that image on discrete points on film. We haven't had that ever since we've gone digital. We've removed all of this whole thing here. We've removed the film. We've even removed the light. Okay, so we don't even have a lens anymore in that sense. We have a lens out here now that all it does is focus relative to a chip. So the object is no longer transformed and flipped upside down by dealing with the light in a true lens. This is simply a magnifier, a short distance magnifier that takes this image in and then transmits it straight out to this particular chip. These are called optic conversion, and they usually apply the word tube. It's not really a tube, it's a unit, a little tiny thing like these cameras here, but they're opticons. And what they do is they have a lens here that can only focus just relative to this particular chip back here. And then in between, they've got red, green, blue filters. And so the chip has all these pixels on it, and if it gets something through the red filter, it says, aha, I got some red light. And it says R for red light on that little pixel. And then it says, aha, that was at a 0.00022 some number amount of intensity. Aha, and it stores those two values. And so it stores all these values in the chip, and then it hands it to the software. So from the point that the light hits this lens and then goes through these two filters, or 3 filters, or 20 filters, depending on how color gradient they're trying to get, and it hits the chip, you're not dealing with light anymore. It's electronics from that point on. So software is used to even write it in a frame. So software is going to create the frames in an arbitrary fashion. There's no, the thing they're dealing with is there's a number of components to the metadata about how to write it to disk, pretending to be a frame on film. And thus we can have, if I had green screen behind me or stuff, you can get all kinds of different effects. Maybe my ear momentarily gets light reflected at a specific angle, and the software thinks that my ear needs to disappear because it thinks it's green at that point, right? Or so I tilt my, there we go. So we see the effect on the lenses of the glasses here, and if I had a chroma filter on there that had that sort of cyan color on there, you'd have a big hole in my head. So these are known artifacts of the processing. So this is the woo out there. You have to assume that anything you see on these screens is manipulated constantly just by the software that is attempting to write it to disk. And these are complex little bits of filtering software, and they have to make decisions all the time because we move real fast and the cameras go out of focus and all this kind of stuff. And the only focus they have is this little bit right here relative to the chip. They don't have any kind of a real focus the way that old lenses do. So basically, AI can never be self-aware, and here's why. Black goo doesn't exist, as all these people think, and all this kind of weird shit about the idea of alien AI coming on in. Alien AI floating through space and through the air. Yeah, right. Okay, so a software program is just like a book. You wouldn't expect the characters or the book to take life and come to life in your reality. And that's what these people are basically saying about software, that somehow it becomes a self and materializes and is able to go float about. So anyway, there'll be more of these. I'm going to go and do some stuff here on the, and then I'll get back, and I got to record some other stuff after a meeting. The world's goofy and the woo is deep.